Coming up on this week's show, HS2, £2 billion been written off and much more to come. Restoring your railways, often referred to as reversing beeching, is cancelled, so Richard is jumping for joy. 75,000 fare evasion prosecutions have been judged unlawful. We speak to a leading lawyer on the subject about what happens next. And Royal Mail's decision to quit rail. Varamis Rail tells us why they might have the answer. Welcome to this week's Green Signals, your railway podcast, from me, Nigel Harris, and
from me, Richard Bowker.
We're here again. Train Talk starts now. First of all, thank you to everyone who's left us a super thanks again on YouTube this week. And they are. I shall cycle through them fairly quickly because the list is getting longer. CBL Ward, Graham Baker, Maxstar 2010, Tony Simons, Chris Exley, Bob Walsh, John Veach, Rob Jones, the Independent Brig Line Rail Group again, who are always extraordinarily kind, and Simon Pilkington, who also sent this lovely message. He said, "Super thanks sent. You really have become a great authority in keeping us up to date with matters within the UK and are keeping us all up to date on interesting subjects too. Great work and thank you for your podcast, Compulsive Viewing." So there you go, Richard. You are becoming a great authority and compulsive viewing. How about that?
Well, yeah, it's kind of sort of flattering for both of us, really.
There we go.
So, yeah.
We really do appreciate so many of you contributing to Green Signals with super thanks. So thank you very much indeed. All three of us really appreciate it. We're also getting close to launching our membership scheme, and we hope to be able to tell you about that next week, together with the various benefits you'll be able to get your hands on very soon. We're still working on it.
We are, but it has proved, a little bit more complicated than we first thought, but only because we want to get it right and really easy to use. So we're getting very close. One thing you mentioned there, Nigel, the Independent Brig Line Rail Group, who have been incredibly supportive and generous, also dropped us a note to say, look, we're very welcome to go up and have a look at the challenges they face, I think, with their one service a week or whatever it is. I think we'll do that. I think that'd be really interesting and, one good turn and all the rest of it. So, we'll be in touch about that. And from Brig to world domination, our user map from around the world is really growing. We've had Mike Schumacher from San Diego in California. Wonderful, wonderful place, San Diego. Love that. Daniel Slater, who I think now becomes our third listener from Christchurch, New Zealand. And Richard Minron from Terrebonne in Quebec, which is a northern suburb of Montreal in Canada. So thank you to all of you. We've also, I say we, Steph has also produced this fantastic map of where all our international listeners are. So we'll stick that on the if you go on the website with our additional resources, you'll be able to see it there.
All sorts of little map droppers.
Well, if you're watching on YouTube, you'll have just seen it as well. So there we go.
Well, there you go. Okay. I also like the way that Stevie Athers, I hope I'm not mispronouncing his name yet because I got a reputation for that now, haven't I? Described us on YouTube this week. He said he loves Green Signals because it's like having a weekly talking magazine.
That's really nice, isn't it?
I thought so too. So thank you, Stevie. We appreciate your company and, of course, your compliments. Right, let's have a look at some breaking news. Restoring Your Railways has been cancelled. As we were putting the finishing touches to this week's show, Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, announced that funding cuts to a number of transport capital projects would take place, including the RYR fund. Richard, I bet you're in floods of tears at that one.
Yeah, I don't want to make it sound as if I'm sort of taking any joy from it. I think it's actually, the whole thing is a bit sad, really. I always felt that this reversing beeching or restoring your railways was such a cynical bit of politics, really. It was launched by Grant Shapps.
Cool.
And I think it was just that classic sort of let's press the button that gets everybody excited in it. What was what I thought was wrong about it was that it got loads and loads of people up and down the country going, oh, we might be able to reopen this or reopen that, most of which were never going to happen in a million years. So I thought it was rather cynical, actually. And the fact that it's gone now won't actually change at all the ones that would open or not open, but it's just hopefully finally brought to an end the nonsense of it.
I agree, it was cynical. Steph and I noticed on Rail that whenever they mentioned beaching in those terms, the national media lost their minds and ran into an English world of the famous Five and Miss Marple. And forgot all the serious issues. It was classic distraction and utter cynicism. And you're right, it built up the hopes of people quite wrongly, and it was not on. And of course, the example they used to illustrate why it was a good idea, which was Oakhampton, was not a beach enclosure in any case. So,
no, it's 60 years ago since that report. And actually, ironically, the Labour Party campaigned in the general election at the time that they would reverse it. And of course, they didn't. And actually, Barbara Castle, as the Secretary of State for Transport, carried on.
Continued and amplified it.
Yeah, the whole thing's is so badly misunderstood. There are some good schemes, and they will continue, but the daft ones won't.
Especially when they're strategic, Rich?
Strategic, right. Anyway, talking of strategic, okay, the other thing that when Rachel Reeves made her announcement that we were slightly nervous about, there was a piece in the Sunday Times, and then they were talking about it on the Radio 4 as well, that she might also can Old Oak Common to Euston on HS2. And actually, I was invited onto the Today programme to talk about that very issue.
Very good, as usual, Richard.
Thank you very much indeed. Fortunately, that didn't happen. But for now, and I still a bit
anxious,
concerned about it.
It's not out of the woods yet, I don't think.
No.
The NEO report, of course, said that they had to decide that by this summer to avoid much higher costs in the future. Yep. And the fact that the tunnelling machines, the TBMs, are already in the bores, aren't they? I think they are, would hopefully encourage them to go ahead with that one. Hopefully they can't be that stupid, but you just never know, do you?
You never know. It's not over till it's built.
Right, indeed. So, when we recorded last week's show, it was shortly after news broke of the publication of the National Audit Office, the NAO report I just referenced, which was an update following the decision to cancel HS2 Phase 2 north of Birmingham. It was too late for us to squeeze into the programme. It's no bad thing because it's a monster, and it's given us a chance to have a proper look at it, by which you mean it's given Richard time to dive into the detail in his customary fashion. And Richard has his usual forensic assessment. Over to you, my friend.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Nigel. I mean, the good news is two things. One, it's not very long. I haven't worked out. 11 pages, right? And that one of those is the cover.
But it's big stuff.
It's so, and the second thing that's, I suppose, got to point out, there's not really anything in it that we didn't already know, right? So the purpose of this report is the NAO saying, what do we think has happened since the announcement of cancellation in October last year? How are you getting on?
So what are your key points then, Richard?
Well, bearing in mind the field work for this was done prior to the election, I think it's quite a relevant thing. Well, there's key points. Okay. So one of the things the report says, the government's decision to cancel Phase 2, so that's north of Birmingham, created uncertainties in a range of complex areas. And wait for this bit, Nigel, particularly as HS2 Limited and other rail organisations, from which we've got to assume they mean Network Rail, had not been involved in the decision, right? These areas include what infrastructure and rolling stock are required for Phase 1 and how HS2 trains will connect to the West Coast Main Line. So nothing trivial.
Nothing simple.
I mean, nobody who knew anything about what they were doing was involved in the decision. Right. So that's now laid bare.
They probably didn't want to ring them at 2 a.m. over the minibar the night before the conference when they made the decision.
Well, and don't ask a question you don't really want to hear the answer to, do you?
Exactly.
I mean, you might get told you're about to do something really stupid, so just don't ask in the first place. it gets worse. Okay, so the report points out that some infrastructure work may be completed that is not needed for phase one. So there will be platforms at Curzon Street Station in Birmingham, quite a few actually, that will be built because it actually doesn't really make sense to change it now, but they will effectively be mothballed. What an advert that will be for the world when they arrive at Curzon Street Station.
That stood out to me as well. I think it's 7 platforms, of which they need 3. So 4 are going to be built as disused platforms from the start. Compared with, at the other end of the line, at Euston, they're making the size of the station smaller to save money, thereby constraining the capacity of the whole network in the future. So you couldn't make it up, could you? You've got too many platforms being built disused at one end and they're probably not going to build enough at the other. It's a monument to government stupidity, or rather prime ministerial stupidity in this case.
Yeah. It gets even worse, right? So one of the things that comes out of this is just the whole approach that they've got. So for instance, I'll read you sort of 3 points. Disposing of phase 2 land and property will take several years, and DFT is in the process of establishing a strategy to achieve value for money for that.
Strategy, there you go.
Well, yeah. DFT's plans for resetting Euston Station and surrounding wider development are at an early stage. It has not yet decided on its scope, funding, or governance. And DFT is not yet clear on how it will maximize the benefits of the new scope and how it will achieve them. Now, think about those 3 points. This decision was taken in October last year. Mm-hmm. Now, okay, we've established that they weren't consulted on it. It just got done by a special advisor cabal in a smoke-filled room somewhere, and nobody who had any stake in actually delivering this thing was asked their view. Right, we know that. But now you've had 9 months. And yet the NAO report says basically you still don't even know what your plan is. Not executing it, you still don't even know what the plan is. What have they been doing? Right? The West Coast route modernisation strategy in 2001 to 2002, when the SRA did this, took about 6 months from starting writing it to actually publishing it. Okay? Not because we're clever, just because we just said, right, we're not, you group, you don't do anything else except get on and do this and make it happen. Pace, 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 pace. And sorry, this is 9 months on and they still can't even answer any of those questions. Is I think
it's shameful. You know, it's dereliction of duty. It's neglect. It's whatever, betrayal, whatever adjective you want to come up with. I mean, your point about property, Richard. Again, that stuck out to me that they've spent £500 million, £592 million buying land around 1,000 properties on phase 2 route. They don't longer need them. So 179 parcels of land across 63 farms. I mean, that is a big job to probably try and sell that land back to the people they bought it off in the first place. I mean, it's Corporal Jones politics, isn't it? Running 6 steps one way and then 6 steps back the other, all the while shouting, don't panic.
I really feel for the HS2 team.
Yes.
Right, because the amount of work that the legal team and their property team will now have to effectively undo. It's partly soul destroying, but it's also really complicated. And it actually, you know, it's not an easy task to just unwind all this. But you know what the absolute worst point of this entire report is? It's this one. It actually says DFT will not be able to address capacity issues on the West Coast Main Line north of Birmingham. Now, remember, when they published the Network North document, easily candidate for most appalling piece of transport policy
ever
in recorded history, right? They actually said that there will be, I'll read you the words, it's amazing. This will cut journey times from Birmingham to central London by half an hour. This is i.e. carrying on with phase 1 of HS2. It will also reduce journey time between London and Manchester, facilitated through an upgrade at Hansacre Junction. It will have phase 1 of HS2 will have a transformative effect on rail capacity, nearly doubling capacity up to 250,000 seats per day across the primary long distance operator on the West Coast. The bit that they forgot to mention, and which we all pointed out at the time, was, between Birmingham and wherever in London you finish, fine. But north of Birmingham, disaster. It's a mess. And they all went, oh, no, you don't understand. Right. This is what the NAO say. The HS2 programme was originally intended to improve capacity on the West Coast Main Line. We know. However, the HS2 services that will run north of Birmingham will not resolve capacity issues on that section. And DFT, same DFT, now estimates the line could reach capacity by the mid-2030s. DFT plans for HS2 trains to run from the Phase 1 track onto the West Coast Main Line in place of conventional trains, but the trains will have fewer seats than existing services unless changes are made to infrastructure and stations to accommodate longer trains. And we know that can't easily be done at Manchester anyway. And this is the bit that sums it all up for me, Nigel. Options for addressing capacity issues involve, at a high level, managing demand for rail services, which is code for pricing people off, right? Or investing in infrastructure such as additional tracks and longer platforms.
West Coast Route Mob 2, here we come. No.
Seriously, somebody has actually written those words as if that is how you fix the problem now created. Let me tell you this. The idea, you just said West Coast Route Modernisation 2. No.
I said, no, it's not going to happen.
No, it's not going to happen. You're absolutely right. I mean, this is naive. I mean, this is like my first railway book. I can't understand how people don't understand the enormity of the problem and the fact that unless we build additional capacity, seriously additional capacity, we will have a major issue to come. It's just extraordinary.
Well, yeah, I mean, paragraph 4.21 on the capacity on the West Coast Main Line section is just horrifying. It actually says this. You just referenced part of it. Managing demand for the service by incentivising people to not travel by rail.
I mean, I hope people have just let those words sink in. Right.
Incentivise people not to travel by rail.
Yeah. Make it too expensive. I mean, what nonsense is this? And what is very frustrating is that everybody said all of this in October last year.
Instantly, the day after he announced it.
Yeah.
I mean, we said it, Andrew McNaught, all the people who know anything about it, we're all over Twitter and we're on green signals. It's very hard to say, not to say we told you so, isn't it? But it's just...
I seem to remember
why should we say we did tell you so?
We did tell you. I did the Today programme again, went on at the same time as Grant Shapps and said that we are going to run out of capacity. And he said, no. People are just using Zoom and Teams now, right? I mean, literally crazy stuff. And now the DFT admit that capacity will probably run out by the mid-2030s. I have to tell you, it will be earlier than that. And next week, we're going to talk a little bit about timetabling, capacity management, and why that's the case. But it's crazy, this.
It is such a mess, isn't it? It's hard not to throw an FFS in at the stupidity of it all, because it is just stupid. And I remind our viewers and listeners again that when Rishi Sunak took to the stage at the start of the conference last October, his wife introduced him with the words, "I know you will always take tough decisions for the long term, Rishi." Right.
Yeah.
What utter BS and nonsense that's turned out to be.
Now, it is important to point out that we are not saying that HS2 was the world's greatest managed project. No, they've made many, many mistakes. And number two, I certainly wouldn't suggest that the government at the moment is not faced with some very, very difficult spending decisions and trade-offs. We're not naive. We know all of those things are true. But when it comes to the rail network and the principal revenue flow that pays for so much, which is the West Coast Main Line, the capacity problems have been seriously telegraphed. And if they are not addressed now, in terms of putting plans in place, at the point that they become a serious crisis, they will not be capable of being fixed at that point.
Well,
that is why this is so serious.
Well, you have said many times on this programme, on this podcast, that the West Coast Main Line is the busiest and most profitable passenger route in the country, and they've completely hobbled it. Yes, you're right about us not claiming this is a saintly project. Figure 8 in the NAO report is really worth having a look at the table of reasons for cost increases on phase 1 and just dipping into it at random. Design and management of civil construction contracts. The contracts incentivise contractors to prioritise delivering to schedule over managing cost. Little commercial consequence for contractors starting construction before ensuring the design was fully tested as meeting requirements, and so it goes on. Immature designed. Estimated cost increased as the designs matured. Well, what a surprise that is. And it goes on and on. Contractors have insufficient capacity and capability to manage such things. Figure 8, read and weep.
Yeah. And there's a saying in sort of public sector, public-private relationship contracts is if something ever gets into difficulty, always start first with the quality and competence of the client, right? And don't just necessarily go and beat everybody else at first. And the client, in this case, has been the DfT.
So that's where the tail on the donkey belongs.
Well, it's where,
starts.
Everything needs to start, But look, there's no point name calling or shouting. It's what we do next that really matters. But what needs to happen is that somebody needs to sort of sit back and go, do you know what? If we don't fix the principal section of the West Coast Main Line, we've got a big issue coming. So, and in fact, go further than that, Nigel. It really brings into stark relief just how crazy I think it would be to entertain any further open access application on the West Coast until there is a plan to fix the mess that might be 9 years away, but it is coming down the track, okay? So next week, on green signals, we're going to do, I don't really like this phrase, but it works on this occasion. We're going to do a really deep dive into the West Coast and the history of its timetabling from the last few years of British Rail through to Virgin Trains, Pug 1, Pug 2, which obviously then had to get sorted in the West Coast Route Mod, which the SRA led, and then what's called the VHF timetable through to COVID and what's happening now. And we'll go through it and we'll see. We're going to be quite technical. We'll talk about rules of the plan and we'll talk about timetable rules and all the rest of it, and with a focus on reliable operation.
Well, a few people know more about it.
Just show what the problem is.
There's few people know more about it than you do in that respect, Richard. But just reference your early comment. It's not a case of name calling. It's a case of you're never going to solve a problem unless you understand fully how you've got into the mess you're in.
That's fair.
This NAO report absolutely lays it all bare. They're monster issues.
Yeah.
And I just hope that Louise Haig and Peter Hendy and the rest of them really dig into this and do the right thing. Otherwise, we're going to be in even more of a problem. And it goes back to your famous comment about a direct in mind, isn't it? We're certainly going to need somebody on the West Coast to say, you do that, and you clear off.
I'm just not sure I would leave getting out of this mess to the people who have quite a lot of stake in having got us into it in the first place. So I think that is a real challenge. And if it's industry professionals who really understand how
that's what it needs.
Timetabling, operations, capacity management and planning works need to be all over this now.
They absolutely do. But the East Coast Main Line, look at the mess over the timetable there, because that has not happened. They're trying to achieve a timetable by consensus. So we cannot make that mistake again.
No. But do tune in next week if you want to hear about the timetabling stuff, and we'll try and lay some of that. We'll try and explain all that in detail.
In layman's terms.
In layman's terms. Well, I can't do it any other way because I'm not that clever. But if you love a good disaster movie, Nigel, and one that doesn't necessarily have a happy ending, then this will be an episode not to miss.
I can't wait, Richard. Maybe we ought to get Steph to knock up some kind of movie poster type thumbnail for it.
Oh, that'll be good. She's probably loving that, right? Yeah, great. Good.
Okay. Shall we move on?
Yeah, I think we should.
I was going to say something less controversial, but it's not. Right, so don't miss next week's show. 75,000 unlawful rail fare prosecutions. Sticking with controversial topics, therefore, you may remember that a few weeks back we revealed that 75,000 train fare prosecutions may be unlawful because they were prosecuted under the Single Justice Procedure, or SJP, which is the same procedure that's used for minor offences, such as if you don't have a TV licence when you should, so it doesn't clog up the courts. Regular listeners and viewers will recall that 6 test cases were to be heard at Westminster Magistrates Court on July 19th, with an awful lot riding on the outcome.
Absolutely. There was a lot riding on it. It did take place, and I subsequently managed to speak with Nathan Seymour Hyde, who is partner and solicitor within the private crime team at Reeves Solicitors. Nathan's head of the firm's fare evasion team, and we discussed the outcome of those test cases, what it means for the prosecutions that have already gone through the courts, which have now been declared unlawful, and what can now be done to put that right. Here's what Nathan had to say. So, Nathan, we've discussed previously on green signals that 6 test cases were to be heard at Westminster Magistrate Courts on the 19th of July. That's now happened, and I understand that all the parties agreed that the prosecutions were unlawful. So I wonder, could you just explain, sort of as simply as you can, how it was that everybody agreed in the end that they were unlawful?
Sure, yeah. I think it's probably important to explain a little bit of background. So before the single justice procedure, which is at the heart of this matter, all fare evasion cases were prosecuted in open court listings. So you have a specific court listing, people have to attend court, there are 3 magistrates that hear the case. And in 2015, the single justice procedure was introduced, and that allowed cases to be prosecuted with economies of scale. Minor offences could be prosecuted without court listings, and they would be processed with a single magistrate and a legal advisor. Now, one absolutely fundamental limitation of the single justice procedure is specified in section 16A, and that states that any offence has to be non-imprisonable under that procedure. Right. And that is essentially where certain rail companies have fallen foul of the rules. So what they have done is they have used the single justice procedure to prosecute using section 5 of the Regulations of Railway Act. And that offence carries a theoretical prison sentence of 3 months. So I think it's clear that any case prosecuted in that way would be unlawful. It's a breach of the single justice procedure, essentially. So when those 6 cases came to court, the barristers for the 2 train companies associated with those 6 test cases were all in agreement that yes, that's just simply not allowed, and that those cases would be unlawful.
So it's not that we're not saying the 75,000 or whatever the number is cases shouldn't have been brought to prosecution, just that the ones that were brought to prosecution in this manner used the wrong process. I mean, it's a bit embarrassing, isn't it? I mean, I can understand why the rail companies might have made that mistake, but I would have thought the magistrates themselves, the courts would have said, hang on a minute, you can't use this process.
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting point. So yes, definitely I think just a straightforward human error in selecting the wrong charge, which is very, very unfortunate. But then it's unbelievable that over a long period of time, with thousands of cases, presumably many, many different single magistrates, many, many different single legal advisors, and none of them noticed as well. So it could have been picked up earlier, and we wouldn't have hit this point. But it wasn't picked up by anybody until it had grown into this situation, potentially 75,000 cases. I suspect it will be quite a bit less than that, actually. With these particular train companies, Northern Rail was mentioned, Greater Anglia was mentioned. In terms of my firm, we've come across a few cases, 2023, for example, and those cases were prosecuted correctly. So it's not every single case with Northern Rail and Greater Anglia that were prosecuting correctly.
That kind of makes it even more surprising, isn't it? So some they got right and some they got wrong. But we'll come on to what the consequences of this are in a minute. But I just wanted to ask you about one particular test case, if I may, because this was in your sort of excellent blog piece that you wrote about this that we saw. And this is a passenger called Ms. Cook. She travelled using Northern Rail, one of the companies you mentioned, and it was reported that her bank card had not worked in the machine to buy a ticket, so she couldn't get the ticket out of the ticket vending machine.
Mm-hmm.
So she ended up boarding the train, thinking she could get one from the train manager or whatever. But of course, it's a bylaw offence to board a train without a ticket, and so as a strict liability offence, apparently a genuine misunderstanding is no defence. Can you just explain what that means and how was she supposed to do anything if the only method of buying a ticket before she got on the train was broken?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, the rules are quite simple in terms of the bylaws. If you board a train without a ticket, that is an offence, and so if you had no dishonest intent, that doesn't make any difference. If it was a genuine misunderstanding or mistake, that doesn't make any difference. You've boarded the train, you don't have any ticket. So if we take her example, her bank card wasn't working according to the reports, so she couldn't buy a ticket from the machine. Now, I don't know what station she boarded, but you have the Trainline app on. Most people have a mobile phone, so you can buy an electronic ticket. One perspective might be you need to organise yourself a bit better so that situation might not have arisen. And if there was a member of staff, you can explain the situation in some context. You can get permission to travel, where they would give you a slip of paper that confirms that. So you haven't, and that would be a way around breaching the rules. But we don't know the exact details there. But clearly, she boarded without a ticket, and it sounds like the kind of situation where a penalty fare would have been correctly issued. And then it's unfortunate that there probably was a series of events there that ultimately led to the conviction being recorded.
But just to be clear, then, if you are, I'm going to use a slightly extreme example, but people do raise ones like this. So if you're a pensioner who doesn't have a smartphone or doesn't know how to use one anyway, so can't use an app, is perhaps even unbanked, right? Relies upon either a person at the station or at least a ticket vending machine being able to deliver it simply. If none of that works, you are still committing a bylaw offence if you get on the train without a ticket.
Yeah, without the permission to travel, yes, technically. But I think if that, you'd like to hope if that actual situation arose and a ticket inspector checked a ticket, that they would exercise a bit of common sense and discretion.
I completely agree. Okay, well, let's move on from that and say, right, so what happens now? Does it, with these 75,000, does that now mean because, or whatever the number is, because I accept your point about we don't know exactly how many, given these 6 test cases, does that mean now all these previous prosecutions are declared unlawful and they all are quashed? What happens? Do they get overturned? What if you've got a criminal conviction? Can you get compensation? How does it work?
Yes, well, it's quite an undertaking to untangle all of that. And there will need to be an agreed procedure about how the parties approach this. So one option would be that the train companies make an application under Section 142 of the Magistrates Court Act, and that is to correct an error. Now, normally that would require a bunch of separate court listings. So if it was 75,000, clearly that's going to take an extremely long time and a lot of court time. Another option would be for the train companies, in conjunction with the court, to undertake an auditing process and prepare a massive list of the affected cases and to make one application to reopen all of those cases because of this error. And then under delegated powers, the legal advisors could complete that as an administrative exercise. So going through and being authorised to actually reopen all of those cases. Wow. And once the cases are reopened, and then they would be withdrawn by the train companies, then you have the money that the defendants had to pay as part of the sentencing to those cases. So in terms of the component parts, you have a fine that was paid to the court, you have the legal costs, and you have the compensation for the fare that were ultimately paid to the train companies. So all those payments need to be reversed. So the train companies would have to pay back that money, presumably to the central fund within the court, and then the individual defendants would have to be tracked down and checks would have to be in the post essentially to return that money. Now,
What
most of these people,
what if they've moved house?
yeah, so lots of people have moved address, but this is a similar problem that you have with lots of SJP cases where people move address, don't get the court paperwork, they get fined, they get sentenced in absence, and then ultimately they do get tracked down when they're chasing that money. So the court can check the latest address with the PAYE system, and suddenly they get a letter at the new address demanding the payment. So there may be a similar process where you can track down the addresses with the current PAYE system and things of that nature. But inevitably, there will be thousands of people that will not. It won't be possible to check the address. Maybe they've moved out of the country even. So it's difficult to understate the complexity and the difficulty of completing this exercise.
Cheapers. And if anybody got a criminal conviction, is that overturned?
Yeah, so the moment that the case is reopened, that conviction is then effectively wiped off their record. And then the moment that the train company formally withdraws the case, it then cannot appear on any kind of DBS check as a pending proceeding even. So if they were to reapply for a DBS certificate, an enhanced DBS certificate, it would be clean after the case was reopened.
And could anybody potentially make a almost like sue for wrongful conviction and damages arising as a result of that?
Yes, theoretically, it's not my area of law in terms of it not being a criminal defence area, but you'd have to show prejudice. So if the result of the conviction led to a loss of an employment opportunity or a loss of a job or some other negative impact, then yes, I think there's potential there, yeah.
Wow, okay. Final question. How do we stop this happening again? Is it as simple as saying next time prosecute using the railway bylaws, or is it more complicated than that?
Well, I mean, I think the short answer is no, it's not a lot more complicated than that. If you think that this only affects a few train companies potentially. So you have TfL not affected. They've always used the TfL bylaws. Govia Thameslink, another large company, always have used the bylaws, not affected at all. Southeastern trains, they use Section 5 of the Regulations of Railway Act. As far as I know, always prosecuted correctly in open court listings. So a lot of these companies may feel that it can carry on, and they haven't actually made any mistakes in that regard. And the companies affected, it's easy to rectify. Yeah, you could just either select the correct charge under the SJP, or you do it by open court listings. Obviously, they're going to be looking at themselves. They're going to be they've been seriously burnt by this. They'll be being very careful about damage to the reputation, and how to best behave here. But you also have the problem of huge sums being lost to the railway industry with fare evasion. So they're going to want to have a recourse to chase that money back, and in some cases they may merit prosecution on particularly serious cases.
I think that's a very fair point, Nathan. I mean, fare evasion is a very, very serious issue, and I don't think anybody would suggest in the industry that you should somehow back off this. Absolutely not. But obviously, just need to use the right process. So, Nathan, thank you so much for your time and shedding light on what could be quite a complex area. But you've made that really clear and helpful. So, really appreciate that, and thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
So, plenty of food for thought there, and we shall be keeping our eye on how that progresses as it works its way through the legal system.
We should. There's one thing to mention, which Nathan did point out subsequent to that chat. When he and I were discussing the test case of Miss Cook, I think I possibly slightly confused him by talking about the ticket vending machine being broken. And of course, Nathan pointed out subsequently that if the machine is broken, and there is a defence against the fact that you could not, purchase a ticket, that the method of sale was not available to you.
Okay.
But in the actual case of Miss Cook, it was apparently because her bank card wasn't working. So that was her issue, according to the legal process, not the machine's. And that's why the strict liability thing did apply in that case. So just happy to just clarify that, because that was an important point.
We don't want to murky the waters further, do we?
Indeed not.
Right, let's move on to this week's Railway News Roundup. Here we go. LNER has launched its first ever carbon-saving departures board, which it says is to help demystify carbon jargon, which apparently 75% of us find confusing. Phrases like net zero, carbon offsetting, carbon footprint, and so it goes on. The new departures board instead equates the emissions that passengers save by travelling by train from King's Cross on a typical day, as opposed to car or plane, to easily recognisable objects such as X amount of CO2 being the equivalent of 28 elephants. Oh dear, sorry. Or 19 T-Rexes. How much CO2 to fill an Olympic-sized swimming pool, one wonders.
Right. I'll just let you compose yourself.
Sorry.
And I'll move on to another story.
It was just 28 elephants of CO2. Anyway, right, okay.
Yeah. Okay. Well, anyway, this is good news. I used to use this line a lot. Network Rail has finished electrification of the Midland Main Line between Kettering and Wigston. And I can just hear a number of people go, where?
Well,
anyway, they will now test the new equipment to make sure it's all working correctly. And obviously they're working with East Midlands Railway on the introduction of their new bi-mode Hitachi Class 810 fleet. Now, what's interesting, the reason why I make that slightly sort of cheeky remark about Wigston. Wigston, of course, is just south of Leicester, which is a very, very important station on the route. So
huge
why not just go to Leicester, right? There's some challenges there. And unfortunately, the trains are bi-mode. But we understand there's now funding in place to work on the designs for the next stage, which would be Leicester and then Derby and Sheffield. And in fact, Network Rail is doing some work on bridges in the section from Syston, which is a big junction just north of Leicester, to Trent Junction, which is just south of Derby. And that'll be starting work later in the year. So it is good, but come on, rolling programme of electrification, please. That's what's important.
And also, it suddenly occurs to me that when they get that done, there's going to be a fairly new fleet of trains displaced, isn't there?
Well, once the 810s are delivered, whether they'll be able to operate in bi-mode. So you're right. So even now, there's a whole series of, I think they class 222s, the Meridians, the sort of Voyager style things. Yeah, there'll be a fleet of those, probably looking for things to be able to do. Cross country strengthening, anybody? I don't know.
But there you go. Right. Some VIBs, otherwise known as very important beams, have been delivered as part of a £22 million project to rebuild a major railway bridge that takes trains over the M62 in Castleton near Rochdale. It will involve the first ever weekend closures of the M62 from September 6th to the 9th and 20th to the 23rd. The two 42-metre, 70-ton steel beams were manufactured in Ireland before travelling more than 200 miles by land and sea to be built in situ ahead of installation. The railway will be closed from September 6th to the 25th between Manchester, Victoria and Rochdale, with rail replacement buses in operation. A delight for everyone.
Yeah, but, when it's done, it's great. And, if you've been watching on YouTube, you'll have seen a bit of footage of the very important beams. And it's pretty dramatic stuff, isn't it? And actually, staying with bridges, a year-long project to strengthen, that iconic high-level bridge over the River Tyne in Newcastle,
the
which is amazing.
One, yeah.
It's now complete, which is fantastic. 5.2 million from Network Rail to overhaul the underside of the Victorian structure. Again, if you're watching on YouTube, you can see the footage there. Designed by Robert Stephenson. So this definitely goes back to the dawn of the railways.
It does.
And when it was completed in 1849, it was the first double-decker road and railway bridge in the world. I didn't know that. So that's quite impressive. They've been able to do the work without affecting anybody during those works as well. So that's a terrific achievement. Well done, Network Rail and everybody involved.
It is a great achievement, and it strikes me that 5.2 million quid with no disruption seems like a good value project in every respect.
Well, yes, when
compared with the station
is 24 million quid, I would tend to agree with that. I think one of those numbers is not quite right, isn't it? And I'm prepared to guess that it's probably Haxby Station, but anyway.
Yeah, 175-year-old bridge. You get a really good view of it from up the Castle Keep alongside at the Newcastle end.
Excellent.
Just thought I'd throw that in.
Thank you.
This is a lovely story. A train conductor from Northern has been praised for ensuring a passenger received fast medical treatment that may have saved her life. Nahid Asif, 47, was working on a train from Crewe to Manchester, Piccadilly, when he realised a woman who had just boarded was unwell and needed urgent help. Trained in first aid, Nahid alerted the driver, who stopped the train at Cheadle-Hulme, and the line was blocked while Nahid contacted the emergency services. The passenger's condition deteriorated, but Nahid was able to provide assistance until the paramedics arrived. Well done, Nahid. The lady was taken to hospital for treatment, and a relative later got in touch with Northern to say that Nahid's quick intervention may have saved her life. That's just brilliant. And that's the news roundup for this week. A quick reminder that we've set up a new email address if you want to send us news tips, and it can be small items about your area that have a big effect. Please let us know. The address is news@greensignals.org, and it's for all of you, our listeners, viewers, to send snippets of information of whatever you think might be of real interest. We can't promise to include them all, but the best ones and most interesting ones we most certainly will. And we'll always name check whoever sends us an email we read out. So we'll move on to follow up our Royal Mail story from a couple of issues ago. A few weeks ago, we reported on the news that Royal Mail has decided not to use its own trains anymore. And it's unclear exactly how much they're going to use anyone else's trains either, though they did state an intention to do so. Sadly, maybe not surprisingly, nobody from Royal Mail has yet agreed to join us on the show. No one's been available. But Richard managed to speak to someone else who had some useful insights, didn't you?
I did. I managed to get hold of Phil Reed, who is a former train driver and operations manager, very experienced railwayman. And he's also quite the entrepreneur, and he set up his own freight business called Varamis Rail, doing sort of quite similar stuff to sort of high value rail parcels and so on. And so I asked Phil about the background to Varamis, what his kind of vision was, how they're getting on, and in particular, what his thoughts were on the Royal Mail story. Well, welcome to Green Signals, Phil. It's great to have you on. Varamis Rail, where did the idea for this come about? And what's the kind of the vision for the business?
Well, yeah, lovely to meet you as well, Richard. Yeah, well, I'm a train driver, sort of operations manager on the railway, lots of experience. And I was moving the trains that we've currently purchased and moving between Glasgow and Birmingham every night. I was moving them out of passenger service a number of years ago. With that sort of knowledge, and my knowledge of the UK rail network is pretty extensive, having worked at Connex South Euston, LNER, Great Western, and Thameslink, and lastly Rail Operations Group. It became very apparent that there was an opportunity with the uptake in home deliveries and express parcels that we could repurpose such trains from passenger service, and these trains no longer complied with current regulatory and legal sort of mods on the train. Basically, right. they weren't prepared to take the toilets out, and as you know, toilets all need to be tanked now, and they can't be discharged directly on the trains, on the railway. So, these trains had come to the end of their lifespan, or so other people had thought. But I still believe there was a good 5 to 10 years left in these electric multiple units that are fully electric, they're high speed, and that in essence was the vision that I had, was to create a high speed parcels network around the UK that was fully electric, that was totally sustainable. And so that's where basically the division came with. We then started making a few strides, discussing options with Eversholt Rail Group, who were themselves very incentivized about what I was trying to deliver, and the railway as well, because Network Rail have been fantastic in their support for what we're doing too. And I think there's a big group of us on the railway that believe that there could be a big opportunity to service such a market, not just because of the green benefits, but because it's much quicker than any other methods around at the moment.
So how's it going then? Because you've got quite a lot of rolling stock now, haven't you? Are you starting to build up a good network of customers? Are you getting good loads? Just how is it going, or is it still sort of too early to say?
It's still very early doors at the moment. When we first started this, Richard, I thought within 3 or 4 months the trains would be full. We'd be going multiple destinations and so forth. But it's been really challenging, much more so than I ever thought. We was very fortunate in December of 23 last year to receive some investment that allowed us to purchase 10 multiple units, 10 4-car multiple units from Eversholt Rail Group. 5 of them converted and 5 of them with the intention of converting them once we proved the concepts and proved what we could do. There were 2 things we needed to prove, and that was that the trains could be reliable enough to service such a market, and that the network could as well. So you talk about train planning before and the pathing of trains. I believe that what we've tried to deliver with the type of train we've got, it should be much easier for us to find capacity within the current train planning rules. Because of the speeds we can run at, the trains that we have can integrate with passenger services that predominantly take up most of the space on the railway.
And just explain a little bit more about the other costs then, because I know that electric traction, basically the juice, is something that has risen quite significantly to the point where some freight operators have either mothballed or sold electric locomotives because they just can't justify the costs. You're all electric, so is that an issue? And also, the other thing that intrigues me is how you manage terminals and distribution. Do you basically just load on station platforms and offload on station platforms, and your customers come to the station for their goods?
Yeah, ET for T, as we call it, electricity for traction on the railway, is a really interesting subject. It's becoming more apparent now that there is, just like domestic users, the railway can fix their costs of electric for certain periods of time. We never decided to do that because I believe when we started running 2 years ago, I think that's when the spike in electricity costs rose far above anyone could imagine at the time. And I just thought it was a bit shrewd to be able to just go with the flow and see how the electricity cost each month would change or differ. And I think we've benefited from that, Richard, because it's obviously a big cost to us, being an electric train with a fleet of EMUs.
So you're just buying spot prices. You've not fixed.
Yeah, right. We've not fixed anything. Yeah, we're just spot pricing. So each month the new tariff comes out, and generally over the last 2 years it is reduced month on month. So much so that it's down towards probably 40% lower the cost of electricity at the moment than it was 2 years ago when we first. Wow. Because when I first had this idea, Richard, from that moment, during the spike, the cost of electric actually more than doubled for the electric train. So at that point, you're thinking, wow, is there really an opportunity here, because that cost had risen so much. With an EMU, it's much, and the freight we'll always carry will always be much lighter than the train itself, which is very different to a traditional freight company. So the electricity that our trains are consuming is very different to the type of electricity that a locomotive, a Class 90 or a 92, would consume itself as well. You think of a locomotive carrying 2,000 tons with and all the draw of current that it's taken out of the overhead lines.
And what about the terminals and distribution? Is it basically station to station at the moment?
Again, as part of our values to support the circular economy, and one of our philosophies has always been to keep it simple.
Yeah.
So we basically found Birmingham International Railway Station, which was a former Red Star Parcels facility. It had been mothballed for maybe 40 years. So all we've done is tidied it up, brought it back into purposeful use, and the Red Star Parcels model is exactly the business model we've tried to achieve here. We're pretty much the same as what Red Star Parcels was, moving parcels and light freight around the UK's passenger network, really, as it is to offer a more efficient solution to move things than any other means. Predominantly road, really. But
that's a lovely segue into the other thing I was really keen to talk about, obviously, which is Royal Mail's recent decision. So they recently announced that they were ceasing use of their own trains. what, and you put out a fairly sort of clear statement about that and thought that was a bad idea. Where do you think we are now with Royal Mail, and is there in fact an opportunity for you?
Well, we don't know exactly the reasons why they've made a decision like this. One thing that has become very apparent in the 18 months of running now, just over 18 months of running our own services, is that there's a lot of talk about being sustainable and leading a greener life that has a better impact on our planet. There's absolutely no doubt we're living through a climate crisis at the moment. I think all the science and all the scientists and the professors of the world that are focusing their skills on this are absolutely, it's apparent that we are. So I'm not, it was always my intention to try and build a business that was greener than any other logistics solution out there, and that's what I believe we've done. But a lot of the larger organisations at the moment and big business are not really acting from what they're saying. There's a lot of greenwashing going about. There's, I believe that, big business, the government are absolutely doing a good job, I think, in promoting sustainability and going green and making, the planet a better place to live. And I think now big organisations have to come in and to support what we're doing. When you think about, Richard, we move between Birmingham and Glasgow every night in 4 hours. It's one driver. It's potentially 16 to 20 standard HGVs. It's everything that we're doing is so good.
On the Royal Mail thing, though, I absolutely understand all that, and I think that's that kind of overarching mission and vision, if you like, is very strong and very clear. But just on the Royal Mail thing, I mean, your point about you've got to kind of walk the talk. Is there a way of, I suppose, rescuing that? I mean, they've got terminals, they've got facilities, they've got assets, and they've also got a need. So is that somewhere where you think, actually, no, we can step in there and help?
Absolutely, and we'd love to have that discussion. I said that in my messaging that went out last week. Is that come to the table, talk to us. What are the challenges that you're finding so far about moving parcels and light goods by rail freight? I understand that mail and letters has probably dropped quite significantly over the last 5 to 10 years, but they haven't seen the increase in parcel movements yet replace that sort of revenue generation. But when you start talking about the facilities they have, it was always my intention to try and influence access to some of their terminals that are not even used, and they're used as road transfer facilities, and they've got an overhead line outside them with a railway next to it. And I'm like, please, come on, there must be a way for us to be able to make better use of these stations, bring them back into use, create this network, not just for Varamis, but for the industry. I'm a big advocate of rail. I've been on the railway a long time, like I said at the start. So it's just about now, trying to convince people, show people, and we're doing that. We're showing people that, Birmingham to Glasgow at the moment, we've got 2 services a night that we could potentially run. We will run at the moment with relatively small volume that we're looking to increase over the next 2 to 3 months now, with a couple of big retailers that have shown a lot of appetite. There is absolutely an opportunity for Royal Mail to come to the table here. Maybe they haven't got enough parcels or enough mail to fill their own rolling stock. So maybe there's a chance here for them to work with us to aggregate some of the parcels and mail and whatever it is they want to move, aggregate it on a service that we could provide, or anyone else for that matter.
So last question then. If you're giving it a go, you've got a great vision. What are the blocks? What do you need? Where do you need support, and in what areas to turn this vision into a real sustainable reality?
Well, I think we'd like more support from the government. I think look, as I said earlier, but the government are great in messaging the sustainability and carbon footprint and trying to get companies to buy into what they're doing themselves, because the government, they walk the walk and talk the talk. They have to, as the government, and especially with aspirations of net zero in 20 years, we need to reduce our emissions. And transportation is, as everybody should know by now, is the largest emitting sector. We're trying to reverse that at Varamis. So, government have been great so far, but we'd like a little bit more support. We'd like to talk to Royal Mail. We'd like them to sit with us because, like I said to you, I'm a big advocate of what we do on the railway. Maybe they haven't had the service that they deserve in the last how many years. I'm not sure. We'd like to get to the bottom of the facts, and our trains are of a similar age of theirs. So we believe that we could also deliver a more bespoke solution. I think that's where I'm trying to get to with express rail freight. Regardless of who does it, Richard, it has to serve itself. It needs to stand on its own 2 feet. So I believe it needs its own rolling stock. It needs its own maintenance facilities. It needs its own engineers to be able to offer confidence to customers like Royal Mail and everybody else out there to give them confidence that we can really deliver on what we're doing. And we've got the buy-in from Network Rail. We've had the buy-in from Evershot Rail Group that committed to converting the trains that we've got at the moment. Just having that broader, informing people about what we're doing and the benefits around it. And people don't know what they don't know. And there's a lot of people within government, senior figures, that we'd like to expose ourselves to and inform them of the benefits that we really have. And not just for Varamis, this is an express rail freight market that the railway hasn't delivered since the 80s, really, I guess, in earnest.
Daft question. I mean, have you asked Royal Mail for a meeting, and has it just not been possible to set one up yet?
We've met with Royal Mail previously, but it's very difficult, I think, to get the right people around the table to say, right, what is the challenge? Maybe they don't believe us. I'm not sure. Credibility is also maybe something that affects Varamis because we're a new startup rail company as well. But maybe, we're just reaching out. That's all we want at the end of the day is look, sit around the table and and if we can't solve all of your problems, maybe we can solve a couple of them, but at least you're still doing the right thing and being sustainable in the long term.
Yeah. Well, look, Phil, thank you very much indeed for that insight. You very kindly said that we can come and have a look at your operation as well. I'm going to take you up on that because I think people are really interested. I mean, what's fantastic about Varamis is you're having a go. You're trying to do something. It is genuinely entrepreneurial and it's genuinely mission-led in terms of the right stuff for sustainability. So listen, more power to your elbow on that. Really looking forward to coming and seeing what you're doing. I think everybody's rooting for you in that regard. So thank you for your time and listen, all the best and look forward to seeing you soon.
Thank you, Richard. It's been really great to discuss all of our plans for you. Thanks for your great words. They mean a lot. I met up with Nigel a little while ago and Nigel Harrison, and he was the same. And we really look forward to inviting you over to Birmingham International sometime soon.
Brilliant. Fantastic. Cheers, Phil.
Okay. Thanks, Richard. Bye-bye.
Great stuff. I met Phil at Rail Live back in June, and he was a live wire, really interesting to talk to and operationally very up to speed. Definitely knows his buffers from his Buckeyes, which a lot of people don't. And it struck me that I wonder if he might acquire some of those Royal Mail trains because they are properly built with roller shuttered doors and proper floors and securing points. And may even be easier to use than some of the trains he's using at the minute.
Yeah. No, that's very fair. Look, he's really passionate. You heard in that piece just how committed he is. I wonder whether telling Royal Mail they're a bit daft was, maybe they made a sort of softer way of doing it. But what he's trying to achieve is terrific, and he's giving it a go.
Yeah.
And he's given it a go. It's a really interesting model. And he's one of those guys that, he doesn't expect everybody to do it for him. He's doing a lot himself, but he does need some support and help. So, yeah, really good. And, let's hope that he does get some breaks with that. It'd be good.
God loves a trier, and we're happy to support and help him.
Definitely. Talking of triers, should we do the quiz?
Well, I think so. And interestingly, you seem to unofficially go off piste and take the quiz into a visual aspect on Twitter this last few days, Richard, with that picture about where am I with the plaque behind you. About you opened, I knew instantly where it was. But it was our old friend Ross Clark, the East Coast driver, immediately tweeted and said, "Is this a new Green Signals version of the quiz?" And
No, Ross, it's not. No, I was on my way to the Global Centre of Rail Excellence, which is GCRE, which is an amazing project underway in South Wales, in just north of Neath, at Onllwyn, and we had the most glorious weather. I've never seen weather like it. And so next week on the show, hopefully we'll be able to show you a bit of package about that. It was incredible. So that's where I was on my way to. But no, Ross, that's not the new approach to the quiz. Last week's question was this. On what railway line would I be if I had to accept that my malign dog was a defiler's pet? And we thought it might be a little bit trickier, wasn't it? No.
All anagrams are for me. My brain's not thus wired, as you well know.
Oh, one person I think even said, "Oh, this is just so easy," and then got it right immediately. Oh, great. Anyway, malign dog, of course, was an anagram of Godalming, and a defiler's pet was an anagram of Petersfield. So I would have been on the Portsmouth direct line. But if you said sort of like Hazelmere, because that's roughly halfway between the two, that would have been fine. And anything that was obviously the Portsmouth direct line. One person even wrote us a mini history of the line, which was quite extraordinary. But thanks for that. But the winner of the many, many people who got it right is Stephen Bates. So, Stephen, could you email us again on info@greensignals.org to tell us where you would like your mug sent, and we will get it on its way to you. So to this week's question. Now, this one's a bit different, Nigel.
All right, okay.
Well, it's a bit different because this is a reader-submitted question.
Oh, that's new. Are we inviting questions from readers?
Well, we might well do that, actually. Well, let's get to the end of the question first. Okay. So this is from Paul Matthews. Thank you, Paul, who said we could use this question. He, of course, knows the answer, so he can't win a mug, but there you go. But he also asked me just to check it, and I have checked it, and I think it's fine. We'll probably get somebody going, "Oh, I think you're fine." Right, but I think this is okay.
You did that disturbingly convincingly.
Thank you very much. Okay, so here's the question, right? Where on the British Railways network was there a place where the stations, right, more than one, stations had a different spelling to the name of the place itself?
Oh, so one place with two stations spelt differently.
Well, at least two, but certainly more than one, right?
Yeah, got it.
So if you think you know the answer to that, great question, Paul. If you think you know the answer to that, got a new email address, right? We're being super organized these days. It's quiz@greensignals.org. I mean, the info will still work, but if you can remember to send it to quiz@greensignals.org, by Saturday the 3rd of August. You can still use YouTube, but the problem is everybody sees it. And we'll pick out a winner next week on the show. So that is this week's question. And as to your point, are we happy to accept more reader-suggested questions? Yeah, absolutely. So if you send those to quiz@greensignals.org, if you think you've come up with a really good question that will fox people and make it quite tough, that would be brilliant. Thank you very much.
It also saves you having to think of one, Richard.
Well, there is that. I wasn't going to mention that, but thank you for mentioning it. Yeah, that is true. That is a happy byproduct, yes.
Seeing as you've got so many to answer on YouTube, comments on the podcast now, 100 and some odd the other day. Well done. You're doing a great job with that. Good news time. Nice bit of good news sent in by Green Signaller Jeremy Hartill. The Railway Performance Society has launched a new website, and it's pretty interesting. Each year, the Society publishes a list of all the trains in the UK that are scheduled to average 100 miles per hour or more, start to stop. You can also use the website to search for the fastest time on record between any two stations. Hours of fun. For example, if you enter King's Cross to York, the fastest time is 97 minutes, 10 seconds, set by 91.011 on September the 9th, 1991. No Azuma has yet beaten this, apparently. He sounds like a great thing to have a bit of a play with, Richard.
That's brilliant, isn't it? Yeah, absolutely. How the winter evenings will fly by. But that's that. I tell you what, that is a lot of fun. I will be on that at some point. Yeah, nice one. Thank you, Jeremy.
It's a modern version of decades ago, didn't it? In the railway magazines of the time, they used to list all the trains that did 60 miles an hour or more.
Right.
And so it's good to see an update of that. I'm pleased.
Yeah.
So well done, Jeremy and the RPS. And sadly, we've come to the buffer stops at the end of the line again for green signals. We've got time for. Thanks.
Well, I'm glad on this occasion they haven't hoved into view. That was
I'm thinking of. I think it was. I'm sorry, I'm a clue. Humphrey Littleton used to come up with lyrical sign-offs. I might work on a few. Inspired that one actually. There's the great timetable. Anyway, never mind.
Yeah, right. Moving on swiftly, please.
Thanks so much for watching or listening. Don't forget to give us a thumbs up, leave a comment, or subscribe if you're watching on YouTube or whatever other audio channels you're doing. You can register your pleasure at what we're doing. And do join us again next week when we'll be back with more exciting video packages to share with you. We'll see you then. But for now, it's goodbye from me and...
It's goodbye from me.
Thanks for joining us. See you next week.